Looking for new spring outfits or decor? Shop St. Vinny's for quality clothing, furniture, and home goods. Thrifting's cheaper than shopping at big box stores or online, and April is Earth Month, so shopping at Vinny's is a great way to protect the planet. Plus, support local. All dollars spent at St. Vinny's stay in Dane County. Proceeds go to local food pantries, pharmacies, microloans, housing support, and more. Follow at Vinny's Dane County on Facebook and Instagram to be notified when special events are coming up or to see the latest finds in store. This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, spring elections are now less than a week away, and on April 7th, Wisconsinites will decide who will be the next state Supreme Court justice. The two candidates vying for the seat are Dane County-based District 4 Court of Appeals Judge Chris Taylor and Waukesha-based District 2 Court of Appeals Judge Maria Lazar. Judge Chris Taylor joins me now. Judge Taylor, hello. Welcome to CityCast Madison.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I've seen you so many times around Madison. You're one of the first names and faces in the political world I came across when I first moved here, so feels full circle for me. Let's just get right into it. Why should you be the next Wisconsin Supreme Court justice?
Well, I should be the next Wisconsin Supreme Court justice because I have dedicated my entire legal career as an attorney, as the law and policy director for Planned Parenthood, as a former legislator, and now as a judge for the last 6 years, to fighting and making sure people's rights and freedoms are protected, making sure all Wisconsinites get equal justice under the law, not prioritizing the billionaires, the big corporate interests, but I am running to be a justice for the people of the state of Wisconsin. As I've traveled all over this state, really for the last 11 months, I have heard time and time again that Wisconsinites are fed up with not having a government that they feel stands up for them. They want a court that they can trust, a court that has their back. And I am a judge and I will be a justice who always stands up for the people of the state of Wisconsin.
So compared to last year's state Supreme Court election, your race has a lot less spectacle and definitely less spending. That's in large part because the ideological balance of the court is not up for grabs this round. The name of the game has changed. So why should folks still care about this election? What are the stakes?
Well, Bianca, I don't think it's ever been more important in my lifetime to have a strong state Supreme Court. We are seeing the erosion of our rights at the federal level. We are seeing the overreach of the federal government trying to come into our state, take over our elections, nullify elections. We have seen all kinds of things, mass agents shoot people in our neighboring state, and there seems to be no ramifications. So we have to have a strong state court here that is going to stand up for the people of this state, is going to stand up for our democracy, is going to make sure our fair and valid elections are protected, and is going to resist this overreach that we're seeing from the federal government in an attempt to come into our state and infringe on the rights of our state, the independence of our state. So these are things that I'm deeply committed to. I am a very fiercely independent judge, and I am committed to making sure the people of this state get justice and that our state itself is protected.
So we're starting to get into some of the bigger issues that are in this race, potential major cases that could come before the court in the near future when we're talking about our voting and election security. You know, there's also Act 10 is high up there, a possible case to come, potentially political redistricting. Why are you the strongest candidate to help rule on these potential cases?
Well, Bianca, there's been three things that have motivated me my entire life since I was a little kid. The first is I have a deep love for people. I care deeply about the people of the state of Wisconsin. I want them to have opportunities. I want them to have a court that is working for them. Secondly, I am passionate about standing up against injustice. And that's been since, again, I was a little kid. I didn't like seeing people being bullied. I didn't like seeing people being treated unfairly growing up. And then I learned from my own family's experience that the law can be a powerful tool to help people to improve their lives. My grandmother was a single mother to my mother for most of my mother's childhood, almost my mother's entire life, and she struggled to make ends meet, like so many working families, until she got a union job. And that union job that my grandmother got enabled her to support my mom and her two brothers. She had 3 kids to support. She helped my mother go to college. My mother became a 5th grade public school teacher, and I learned the power of the law to lift people up, to improve their lives, to make sure they were fairly compensated. And I think that people are getting the short end of the stick. I don't want that. It seems like the only people doing well these days are billionaires and the huge corporate interests. I am going to be a justice that stands up for the people of the state of Wisconsin because I understand how important the law is in remedying wrongs, in protecting people, and making sure that they get access to justice and making sure the rule of law applies to everyone. It doesn't matter how powerful you are. It shouldn't matter how privileged you are. You still have to abide by the law. And so those are the principles that have motivated me throughout my entire life. And you can see it in my career. I have had a long, diverse legal career. No one has my background. I bring a totally unique perspective to the state Supreme Court, mainly because I've been a legislator and I understand the legislative process, which is really important for a judge. It's really helpful to understand that. But also my deep commitment to justice for the people of this state.
Well, yeah, let's talk a bit more about your professional experience and unpack how being a legislator would be helpful to this role. I'm going to share a little bit of your bio, and we've shared a bit so far, but you currently serve as a judge on the state's District 4 Court of Appeals, based right here in Dane County. You were also a judge on the Dane County Circuit Court for 3 years. You are a former Wisconsin state legislator for this area. You've been an attorney and the public policy director at Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin, among other things, I'm sure. So can you speak to your professional experience and how it's prepared you for this office? If you want to talk about your time in the legislature or any other aspects that you think really situates you as the best person to take this higher office.
Sure. Well, I have looked at the law from every perspective almost. I was an attorney in private practice representing just regular people who needed help. That contrasts with what my opponent was doing in private practice. She was representing big corporations and predatory lenders who were actually foreclosing on Wisconsinites' homes. That's what she chose to do. I chose to try to help the average person in representing them and trying to solve their legal problems. I was the policy director and legal director for Planned Parenthood. I worked to try to ensure that women had access to reproductive health care, cervical and breast cancer screenings that they needed to save their lives in some instances. While I was doing that, my opponent was defending abortion restrictions. She was trying to take us back in time to a time when women didn't have choice. When I was in the legislature fighting for a fair redistricting process, so these legislative maps were not so partisan and political, my opponent was defending these maps. She represented Scott Walker. And she was defending what some election experts called the most gerrymandered maps in the country.
Are you talking about her time working under Republican Attorney General J.B. Van Hollen?
Yes. So She worked under J.B. Van Hollen, the Republican Attorney General, and then Brad Schimmel. And one of her clients was Governor Scott Walker. And she defended the most harmful aspects of Scott Walker's agenda that rolled back people's rights, working people. I don't think working people need less rights. I think they need more rights, and they need to be paid better, but also work to roll back women's advances. And she still is making really concerning comments about limiting access to reproductive health care.
Well, I really want to hear about your experience because we can get more into that. But just giving you the opportunity to flesh out your bona fides and your time in the courts and what you've been able to accomplish. When I was interviewing your opponent, Judge Lazar, she claimed that despite sharing the similar titles on y'all's resume, county, circuit court, and appeals judge, that she presided over a greater, quote, breadth of case types. I wanted to get your response to that. I said I was going to ask you about that. And, what you would like to highlight about your time in the courts.
So, I had that experience at Planned Parenthood where I worked on laws and I worked to represent an organization providing health care to women. So I have that breadth. In the legislature, I worked to improve people's lives. I worked to make sure, people had access to affordable health care. So important still, I worked to make sure that we could drink our water. So many communities I've been in, Bianca, can't drink water. It's polluted in their communities. They're either on private wells or in their communities where they are forced to drink bottled water. So I worked to try to ameliorate some of that. And then, of course, I worked to make sure that regular working people had a fair wage. On the court, I have a really strong record. I've been a trial court judge. I presided over thousands of cases. I had dozens and dozens of jury trials, high profile homicide trials, really serious cases. I respected everybody. People were treated with dignity. I listened, and I made the fairest decisions I could based on the law and based on my obligation to deliver justice. I have never, ever been reversed by a higher court, not on the circuit court, not on the Court of Appeals. So on the Court of Appeals, I work collaboratively. I'm a real collaborator. I like discussing really complicated legal issues. That's what they do on the state Supreme Court. I love hearing opinions that are different than mine, because that's how we reach really good decisions on an appellate court, because we're writing decisions together in a panel. And so that is something I relish in. And I love the deep dive of figuring out complicated legal problems. I think most people who work with me know how prepared I am. I love doing that research. I want to get the best result for the people of the state of Wisconsin. And I've had some really important cases protecting your right to vote absentee, making sure that people are able to bring lawsuits who are hurt through perhaps medical malpractice. So I've had really important cases. And again, I'm really proud of my record. I've never been overturned because I'm so scrupulous in applying the law. I have the support of over 160 judges throughout the state of Wisconsin, including the majority of both my opponents and my colleagues on the Court of Appeals. The majority of judges we both work with are supporting me because they know how committed I am to making sure I'm independent. I am a stalwart for guarding people's rights, and I am committed to delivering justice. And that is what I've done as a judge.
You've started to describe your legal philosophy. And if you could just say a little bit more about the kind of justice you want to be.
Absolutely. I want to be a justice that people have faith in. I want to be a justice that is out in the community. It's so important for me to be independent, but I don't want to be isolated from our state. And I haven't been on the Court of Appeals. I've traveled all over the district that elected me. I was elected to the Court of Appeals by 24 different counties, mostly South Central and Southwestern. But I go as far up as northern, Wisconsin, Clark County. I go down the whole western part of the state and a huge chunk of the central part of the state. And I have gone out with my colleagues on the 4th District. We do presentations to the public. We want people to know what we do. We've met with the attorneys that practice in those districts. We've met with the circuit court judges. We want to be in a discussion, and we want to shed light on what we do. So I am going to be a justice that doesn't just sit there writing my opinions. I am going to be with the school groups, with our kids, making sure they get educated on what the judiciary does. That is a piece of my job. I've had the school groups into the circuit court when I was on the circuit court, talking about what we do. And I want to be in the community. I'm really excited that the state Supreme Court has started going out into communities now and having their oral arguments in different parts of the state so people can see what we do. So it's really important that people have trust in me, that I'm transparent, and that they see I'm going to stand up for their rights and prioritize them, and not the most powerful, and not the biggest corporation, and not the billionaire. I am running because I am passionate about delivering justice to the people of this state.
Explore the wonders of science! Y'all, it's time for UW-Madison's Science Expeditions, the yearly UW campus-wide science open house. Yup, you heard that right. UW is opening its doors to their science labs and research centers to you and your family for free. From April 10th through the 12th, you can adventure around your top-tier public land-grant research university. You can talk with world-class researchers, enjoy science demos, and get hands-on at interactive exploration stations. The variety of programming is amazing. You can learn anything from what the inside of the human lung looks like to the science behind ice cream. You can even meet marmoset monkeys at the Primate Center. Again, UW-Madison's Science Expeditions events are free and open to all. So, see you at the open house? Find the full schedule at go.wisc.edu/science expeditions.
Get excited, Madison. The Sauce Night Market is returning to Garver Feed Mill on Friday and Saturday, April 10th and 11th from 5 to 10 p.m. It's a dedicated space to support emerging chefs, artists, and makers of all kinds, featuring over 50 local vendors. It's a curated market, meaning the Sauce team has put work into bringing you an all-star lineup of diverse vendors, emphasizing quality, creativity, and individuality. The market will feature food from our friends over at Sin City Smash, Mickey's Banks, and Ice Cream Social. And of course, you can bet there'll be some specialty cocktails too. Artist Hannah Brewer will be live painting during the event. The fantastic DJ Dudley Noon will provide the music. Plus, the CityCast Madison team will be there to say hi. The best part, the market is free to attend. That said, guests are encouraged to RSVP at saucemarket.com. Anyone who RSVPs can enter to win $50 to spend on the vendors. So don't miss it. Get your sauce on, and we'll see you there.
It's really fascinating to hear you talk about and applaud being out in the community. I think as the voting public and us out here, we look at the court and we're trying to make sense of the discussion around this being a nonpartisan race and what it means for a judge to run for office and those sort of complexities there. And your Facebook page says, Judge Chris Taylor has spent her career fighting for our rights, our freedoms, and our democracy, and she'll do the same on our Supreme Court. And I'm curious if you could explain a bit about how you see the role of the state Supreme Court in this current political era. And then let's talk about the issue of partisanship and just people's views on running for office and how those things can be separate.
Sure. Well, I cannot remember a time in my life where it's been more important to have a strong state Supreme Court. We are seeing nationally this overreach from the executive. And we have seen it in Minnesota. We're now being sued. Our state's being sued now because the federal government wants our private voting information. The executive is trying to take over elections. It has never been more important to have a court system that holds the executive accountable, that holds the other branches of government accountable. You don't have unlimited power when you're in the executive branch. You don't have unlimited power when you're in the legislative branch. It is the courts that say and hold those branches accountable when they act unconstitutionally and unlawfully. We are seeing at the lower federal courts, they've been one of the few checks on the executive. If it wasn't for these lower federal courts, we'd be in a real different situation right now in this country. So the courts are so important in checking the power of the executive. That is one of the functions of our state Supreme Court, is we check the executive branch and the legislative branch, and we make sure they are not violating our rights or acting unlawfully. And I'll give you some examples of how our state, the current majority on our state Supreme Court has done this. There was an effort, Bianca, in 2020, after the 2020 presidential election. Some individuals and entities tried to overturn our election, despite the fact there was no evidence of fraud. There was no evidence it wasn't valid. There was no evidence that there was anything wrong with our election. And our state Supreme Court rejected those efforts to overturn and throw out hundreds of thousands of votes by one vote. That's it. One vote on our state Supreme Court. Our state Supreme Court recently struck down these legislative maps that some election experts had called the most gerrymandered maps in the country. They struck them down because they were not constitutional. They did not comply with our state constitution that requires all the territory in our legislative districts to touch each other, to be contiguous. That's an example of our state Supreme Court checking the power of the legislative branch and saying, no, you acted unconstitutionally. These are such important cases, but they are only being decided by one vote. That's it. On issues of reproductive health care, our state Supreme Court, again, by one vote, would not implement an 1849 abortion ban. They said that that was not legal, that they would not implement it by a vote. And that abortion ban would have pretty much eradicated access to abortion in the state of Wisconsin in the most tragic circumstances, when pregnancies go wrong, when someone's raped or a victim of incest, just these horrible situations. And our state Supreme Court protected women having access to abortion in our state. That's the kind of justice I'm going to be. I'm going to protect us.
And so about the conversation around partisanship, some folks are worried that the court is becoming too political. Do you think keeping politics and the judiciary separate is valuable? And is it even possible, considering the state's political parties' participation in elections?
Yes, it is possible, and it's imperative, is what I would say, that our court not be a rubber stamp for any branch of government, any group, any party. If you look at my 6-year record, you will see that.
Do you have an example from your judicial record that highlights your capacity for impartiality?
I've ruled against the Evers administration, the PSC, the executive agency, when I thought they were wrong. They needed to promulgate a rule. They were outlawing certain forms of renewable energy, and they had a very old order they were using to justify this, and I struck that down. I said, no, you needed to go about the rulemaking process. I've reversed Dane County Circuit Court judges who I served with. You know, I have ruled for all kinds of different people in different circumstances. Now, most of our cases are not political cases. Most of our cases are family law or criminal or a lot of property disputes. Termination of parental rights, which is an area I practiced in. I did a lot of family law. That's extraordinarily helpful because we get a lot of those cases. But why? It's not the court being political. I don't see this current state Supreme Court being political. We're seeing so many challenges to our elections, and we're seeing so many challenges to rights, the right to vote, the right to cast a ballot. The Supreme Court doesn't just make these cases up. They come to the state Supreme Court. In order for us to act as a court, someone's got to bring a case. And we've seen unprecedented partisan actions happening in the state and nationally. And so those are being challenged, those actions. And those cases come to courts. And that's what courts are supposed to do. So I don't see this court. I think this court, you can see from any public surveying being done that people have confidence in this court. They're seeing this state Supreme Court actually stand up for their rights.
Well, we've been talking a lot about elections, and you're in the last leg of your race. You're currently in the lead, according to the latest Marquette University poll. You're up by 8 points, though majority of voters are still undecided. You've been able to fundraise your opponent. As we discussed, this race has been much quieter than the last 2 elections for Wisconsin Supreme Court. That's an understatement. But how has the lower national attention and spending impacted your campaign, if at all?
Well, I am really happy not to see the well, one particular out-of-state billionaire tried to come into our state and buy our election by spending more money than one person had ever tried to spend. I think it's a good thing we haven't seen all of this outside spending. I would like to see no outside spending. We used to have public financing for these races. In fact, going back, you could go back to 2012, both candidates selected public financing back then. And then the legislature eliminated that. And it was the legislature that allowed the parties to spend unlimited money in these races and to donate unlimited money to candidates. I voted against that. I didn't think it was good to erode all of our campaign finance laws.
And so now is that just part of the game? Because to be fair, you've accepted money from outside billionaires, but is that the name of the game?
Well, I think unfortunately, looking at what happened last year, I welcome support from every person who cares about democracy, about our rights, about making sure that we're not a rubber stamp for the federal government. And so I want to run a really broad-based campaign. Now, most of my contributions, however, and I think at this point 30,000 individuals have contributed to my campaign. I can't solicit any funding. My campaign can. But the average contribution I've received is less than $100. I'm so proud to have such deep grassroots support. I think if you look at my opponent, you'll see her average contribution, at least the last time that we checked, was $900. And I suspect it's even more now if you look at her current finance report. And so the unfortunate reality for candidates running is these races have gotten way too expensive. There's too much money coming in, but you've got to be competitive. I want to win this race, and I know I have to have the resources to communicate my vision and what I bring and why I'm running and what's important to me. But more important, why this race is about the people. It's not about me. It's not about my opponents. It's about them. It's about the voters and what they deserve. But I would like to see all this money go, really. But this is where we are. And, the legislative branch, if they wanted to, they could address a lot of the money coming in.
And has there been any concerns around fear of safety, attacks, the ads to the gratitude of the voting public, and I'm sure to you and your campaign as well, have seemed a little bit more tame than the past cycles. But what has it been like being a politician in this really heated political environment?
And I don't feel like I'm a politician, I got to say. I was when I was in the legislature, but when I became a judge, I'm not a member of any political party. It's so important that people have faith in me and what I'm doing, and they see I'm looking at the law and I'm trying to apply it. But I got to tell you, Bianca, I have had such joy in this campaign. I really have. It has given me such inspiration. The people of this state, I have been all over. I've been to the smallest little towns to biggest cities, and people are working so hard in their communities to protect democracy. It has been a joy for me. I'm going to be sad when this race is over, honestly, because my family won't be. My husband won't be. He's counting the days down. I have a 15-year-old hockey player who needs to start a spring hockey season, and I'm the parent doing the transporting to make up for missing the fall. So, but I am so inspired by the people of this state, and no one's going to take that joy from me. I have deep joy in getting to do a race like this and talking to so many incredible people all over the state of Wisconsin who care so deeply about our state. So it's been a joy for me. And I'm not paying attention to the negativity. I'm sure there's a lot of negative things written about me. I don't pay attention to it. I am a glass half full person. I see the potential in this race. I'm excited. This is democracy. And I can't wait for people to be able to express themselves and vote.
Well, I'm so glad you pivoted to joy, because I have one last question, and it's a fun one. Before I let you go, I want to ask, what is your favorite thing about being a Wisconsinite?
Oh my gosh, there's so many favorite things about it. I think there's two things. One is the people, because the people in Wisconsin are just so engaged, and they want to be relevant in government. They want their voices to be heard. I think that's really unique to Wisconsin. I've seen that for a long time, even when I was in the legislature. People would show up for these budget hearings. I was on the budget committee, and they'd wait 8 hours to testify for 2 minutes. You just don't get that everywhere. So I'm so inspired by the people. And the other thing that I love is we live in such a gorgeous state. It's such a beautiful state. And I'm just reminded of that going all over the state, and I'm grateful for it. But it really does emphasize, I want to make sure that this state is going to be beautiful for my kids, my grandkids, and that we do what we can to make sure that it remains this absolute gorgeous place for future generations.
Some of my top reasons for loving Wisconsin as well. Judge Taylor, thank you so much for taking the time to come on CityCast Madison. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun.
That's Chris Taylor, District 4 Court of Appeals judge and candidate for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. If you didn't hear yesterday's podcast with her opponent, Judge Maria Lazar, definitely go back and take a listen. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. Don't forget you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with a proud voter? All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with our April guide. Until then, thanks for listening and go vote!